Well, we're back in the smoke-filled room. This is what, episode 70? And we're following Labor Day weekend, Labor Day. And so we decided to make this episode more of a focus on workers, on unions, and how Republicans can do a better job reaching those working families that are key to winning in the state of Illinois. Let me introduce some of our guests. We may have a third join us as we go along here, but we've got two excellent guests, so I'm not complaining. We've got Li Arellano. He's the state Senate candidate in the 37th district, soon to be incumbent state senator in just a few months here. He's been the mayor of Dixon for 2 terms. He's a small business owner and a veteran. Li, glad to have you with us this week.
Glad to join you.
I know we've had you on some interviews, but I don't know, have we had you on an official podcast yet?
This is the first one, so go easy on me, but I don't promise to go easy on you. How's that for a deal?
I think you're already a good politician. Well played. We've got a returning guest here, one of our good friends, Keith Pekau. He is the mayor of Orland Park. He's a small business owner. He was a candidate for Congress not that long ago, and has been dealing with a lot of these issues on the front line. So he's going to share a pretty unique perspective with our audience today. Keith, glad to have you.
Glad to be on, Collin. Thanks for inviting me.
And we have our political experts from Northern and Southern Illinois, Chris and Michael. What's up, buddies?
What's going on?
Going fantastic, Collin. Never had a bad day in my life.
Chris has been asking for this episode for like a year and a half. So an episode dedicated to workers and to unions. This is right up Chris's alley. So if he doesn't bring the heat this episode, I think everybody should troll him online, because I'm expecting a lot from you, Jackowiak.
Oh, I'm sure I'll never hear the end of it after this episode, Collin.
Well, let's see what happens. All right, as I mentioned, this is our first episode after Labor Day, and I just want to open this up with sort of a celebration of workers, which is the intent of Labor Day, the people who make this country go, the working men and women who have increasingly become the base of the Republican Party, something that people like Chris and I and others have been begging for years. And it's finally been happening thanks to Trump in 2016. And ever since, Republicans have been focusing more on workers than we ever had before. And we've seen electoral success as a result of it. The more we do it, the more we seem to do well in elections. So we'll start off just with that, with a celebration of workers and the people who really make this country great. Anybody have thoughts they want to share on that?
I think the main thing to celebrate, I wish I would have said this before Labor Day, but even afterwards, is those people who don't get Labor Day off. There are people who work jobs who, you work on a railroad, you're a fireman, you're a police officer, you're a nurse, you don't get Labor Day off. Sometimes it's nice because you get like a double time or triple time for Labor Day, but there are people out there who don't get Labor Day off. They don't get to experience the same, day off that the rest of the country may do, or at least most of the country. So, that's the real shout out I have to give this week, is that, there are a lot of people out there who don't get to enjoy the same work schedule that the average 9-to-5 person does, and they need to be, they need to be commended for their service and, working hard.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I came up out of the service industry. Dishwashers and waitresses don't get Labor Day off. I didn't. As a business owner, you take days off at your own risk. But I think it's a great topic for discussion. The American worker is just the key to what we've achieved as a nation and the American dream. I really think our party, to your point, has been better at leaning in to the fact that we represent people who want to work hard and achieve the American dream because of it. And that really is the kind of the core of who we are and what we do. And I too am excited to see the party really kind of embracing representing working class, middle class folks. Not the least because as a Republican myself, it's getting harder to just tag you with you support the rich. And I would look at it my whole life. I'm like, have you met me? Have you met my family? You're talking nonsense. I think the perception out in the world since 2016, as you mentioned it on, is that the Republicans have been working hard to represent those who go to work every day and make it happen.
Yeah, we talked about it last week. Even in Pritzker's Think Big America message analysis that they presented at the DNC, they admitted, even in that whole big presentation, there was a whole slide about admitting that it's harder and harder to paint Republicans as anti-worker because voters just don't believe it anymore. That's a sign of success. It's taken us a long time to get here, and we're nowhere near where we need to be. But that's a sign of even the Democrats are admitting that they can't really paint us as anti-working family anymore. That's a good sign.
The America was built by the American worker. Going back, to our founding. It's the American worker that's built everything that we have. And the American worker is, it's union workers, it's non-union workers, it's business owners, right? They're working on Labor Day so that their workers can work and have jobs as well. So, that's how we got to where we were, is through hard work and effort, not through taking days off or having having all of the time off that the Europeans have. The reason why we've been such a generator of economic wealth is because we work hard. And there's nothing wrong with playing hard too, but you need to work for what you have. And in America, if you work hard, you can be successful. You may not be wealthy beyond what most of us would, where you have money that you don't have to worry about anything, but you're going to have a good, I truly believe if you work hard in America, you'll have a decent life in America.
Well, and especially we talk about this as the heart of the heartland, the heart of the Midwest. This is hardworking America right here. I mean, a lot of businesses will headquarters in Illinois because they want our workers. They say they can't stand our tax structure, our business environment. There's so much they can't stand about Illinois that makes them want to leave. But those who stay because of Illinois workers, because we are the heart of that Midwestern hard work ethic. And the more that I travel, the more that I do politics outside of Illinois, especially on the coasts, I've learned to really respect and appreciate the Midwestern work ethic, because you don't see it outside of the Midwest as much. And that's why businesses want to be in Illinois, despite all the things we do to try to push them out.
They're not staying for the property taxes, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
There's a saying in labor. It goes, good labor ain't cheap and cheap labor ain't good. Or you can have a job done good and fast, but it won't be cheap. Those sorts of things. And that's kind of the mentality when it comes to labor in Illinois, is that, the state ain't the best sometimes. We have high property taxes, the government's run by idiots and all those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, you'll get a good quality of product from your labor force in Illinois. And that's why people are staying. And it's a blessing that we're still getting some type of, economic development and manufacturing, where states around us, like, Wisconsin, they've tried very, very hard to, build the manufacturing base up back in Wisconsin. It hasn't worked as well for them. But Illinois, we're coming back a little bit, even if it's not as slow, and even if Pritzker tends to screw it up every 5 minutes. We still have something in the state, and it's a good thing.
Let's roll into one of our first topics here, which is just an overall discussion on unionization in Illinois. Timing here is not accidental. There's a lot of news about unions in the news lately. Just recently, in the last week, there was a report about union participation and how there's an increase in new petitions and an increase in success of those petitions, but there's a decline in the union growth rate. I'm trying to pull up the details here. In 2023, there were 4,400 additional workers that were added to unions. That's down from 9,500 the year before. So there are definitely, Link, and maybe if he's got the time, he could pull up some of these charts up on screen as we're talking about it. But there is an increase in the number of union petitions, but the rate of unionization definitely seems to be down in the state of Illinois. Curious if anybody has firsthand experience on that, or anybody just has thoughts on just that concept in general.
Well, one of the big things is that the economy is not going so well right now. So when the economy is not going well, and they talk about all the jobs that the Biden administration is creating, a lot of the time the jobs that are being created right now aren't like good, well-paying jobs that you would associate with like union workers or unionization. You're talking with like more lower level jobs that aren't going to be as prone to unionization as perhaps other jobs. The other end of this is, at least in the public sector, is that the Janus decision has decreased unionization, at least in public sector employment. And obviously Illinois was ground zero for the Janus decision. So that's part of it, over the years that, there's been a problem with post Janus, but even still, a lot of the jobs that are being created right now aren't major. They're not really good jobs the economy's creating right now. They're lower end jobs and they're not as prone to unionization. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, or gig worker jobs that maybe wouldn't be based in unions, at least not yet. So just to back up what you're saying, since Janus, the unionization rate has declined 4.1%. So it was 52.1, now it's 48%. Right now in Illinois, our workforce, the percentage of the workforce dropped below 13% for the first time. That is unions. So it used to be above 13, now it's 12.8. Last stat I'll throw out there, There's a total of 708,000 people in Illinois who are unionized in 2023. That was almost 850,000 and just 8 years ago. So the number of union employees, the rates are definitely down. You're seeing a stark change. This isn't something I follow closely, but obviously you guys all deal with this in the front lines. Chris has given some thoughts as to why that's maybe happened, but this decrease started well before Janus. It started before the Janus decision, so it can't all be attributed to that.
Right. It'll be interesting to see what the continuing effects of Amendment 1 do, because that changed, what happened in Illinois. One of the things I've been curious about, people tend to get fired up when they think their rights are under fire. Look at Second Amendment, folks. Nothing sells more guns than somebody like Obama or Biden coming out saying, I want to ban guns. I think that removed some of what, some of the union households felt was a threat and how active they were. I know for a fact that there are some in union leaders in rural areas. I can't speak to Chicago, of course, who really felt that that was one of their big barriers talking to Republicans. And now, because it's, part of the Constitution, they don't feel under threat from that. They feel it's been solved. How does that play out in the years ahead? I have no idea. I'm just curious, what that does to the mix.
Yeah. Interesting thoughts.
I think at the end of the day, the unionization, I think the numbers that you're seeing going down is because the leadership of the unions, the head of what the unions are doing is not necessarily representing the beliefs of the union members. So we're seeing more and more union members voting Republican, partially because Republicans are actually talking to them, because I actually believe that most of the trade union guys, for sure, guys and gals, are, they align with us a lot more than they align with the other side. And when you see all the money going into Pritzker and to Kim Foxx and things that they don't believe in, of course that's going to drive their membership down. And I think the other issue with that is that trade unions are relatively successful and they do provide an important service in if they're a good trade union, they provide a lot of training and a lot of other things that maybe you don't get. That's where you're getting your training for those trades, and that they're hurting for people that want to be in the trades, and that's part of the issue as well. So that's driving it also.
Yeah, those are good points. I think one of the things, I want to move us to the next topic here. One of the things that, as I'm talking to Republicans and conservatives, and we're talking union issues, one of the struggles they have, especially outside of the Chicagoland area, is understanding that there is a difference many times when you're talking about types of unions. And it always ends up boiling down to this. I end up saying there's good unions and there's bad unions. So let's talk about that. How do you differentiate possibly between a good union and a bad union? And with that, quickly, I'll just introduce our third guest, our sixth participant this week, Aaron Delmar, member of the State Central Committee and co-chairman of the Illinois Republican Party. Aaron, good to have you, bud.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Collin. Love to see Lee on the show today. It's good to have a twin brother here in front of the voting crowd and Republican Party of Illinois on the smoke-filled room. So, twin brother, good to see you guys. Michael and Chris, my favorites.
So the question is, and we'll open it up to the original five so Aaron can get his bearings here as he joins in. But how do you guys describe this? Maybe Chris, I might ask you, or someone else if you've got strong thoughts on this, because I always end up, that's where the conversation always ends up. Guys, listen, you got to understand there are good unions, there are bad unions. You can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. So how do you differentiate? How do you describe that?
Well, I'll first begin by saying how I don't differentiate it is that it's like a lot of Republicans, at least I talk to, will say the private sector unions are good, the public sector unions are bad. But the problem is it's too narrow, because when you talk about public sector unions, you're also talking about police unions, and that's an organization which is probably the most pro-Republican organized labor force in the entire state is police departments and police unions. So you really can't say that all public sector unions are bad, but also want to support, the police department. In addition, there are private sector unions which are very much against our goals, like the SEIU. There are a lot of the SEIU and service-oriented unions are very, very, very liberal, but that's a private sector employment. So you can't necessarily say it's this private versus public sector. I don't think that's accurate. I think it really, I think it really comes down to, I mean, it's very simple, but there are unions who are willing to support moderate to conservative ideas, not just in terms of unionization and infrastructure, but also in terms of government in general. You saw this labor divide in this Cook County State's Attorney's race this cycle, or the race for mayor of Chicago, where the building trades and the conservative unions backed a conservative candidate, be it Paul Vallis or Eileen O'Neill Burke. And the service, the other public sector unions, the nurses, the teachers unions, all those things, they backed the progressive candidate. So it's not really as clear cut, public sector versus private sector. It's really, at the end of the day, conservative versus liberal, good versus bad. And it's not really the answer you might be wanting, Colin, but it comes down to that. There are unions supporting of conservative ideas, and there are unions vehemently opposed to them.
Well, and I think too, kind of to what Keith was saying earlier, you run across some unions where the leadership is not in alignment with what their members want. And I remember in 2018 when I was working for Congressman Boss, when he was running for re-election, and that was a tough race for us. We tried to get a meeting with the steel workers union because Granite City Steel was in our district. And they just refused to meet with us, and they endorsed Brendan Kelly. Then the subsequent cycle, they endorsed Joe Biden, and look at the situation that they're in now. That factory, that steel mill is sold to Japan, and they basically laid off everybody. So they kind of, made the leadership kind of made a bed that the members didn't want to sleep in, right? And that's why those jobs were gone, and that was a big hit to Granite City and that Alton area. So I think that's a factor too. You got to look and see, are the union leadership, are they listening to their members and doing what's in their members' best interest, or is the leadership, out of touch and, continuing to support candidates and policies that do their members a disservice?
One thing I mentioned also is that, Illinois is such a geographically diverse area that you have a lot of Republicans that are strong union members. If you go down to the Vandalia, Statesville area, all those prison workers that are in those, that's their number one force of economy down there is those prisons. They're all Republicans, but they're all union members. If you look at Terry Bryant down there, former, prison guard, right? You get down south there, they are strong ruby red Republicans, but yes, are pro-union. And when you saw that really being highlighted during the Amendment 1 argument, right? Up here in the collar counties of Cook and the northern part of Chicago, a lot of us have very strong opinions that are a little anti-union, especially SEIU and some of the ASME, those groups, because of the costs associated with tourism, Navy Pier, Soldier Field, anything you want to do in the city, it's incredibly expensive. So it's a drag on tourism. But as you make your way south of I-55, that completely changes.
I think it's much like good government, right? Is the leadership representing their constituents? So are they representing their members, right? And have the best interest of their members at heart? Is the union full of, like we see in Chicago in politics, is it full of patronage and nepotism? That's probably not a very good union, right? Or is it, bringing people that deserve those positions, that are truly advocating for the people? And then I think lastly, are they trying to destroy the people they're working with? And they're representing, labor, but there's employers, and the employers have to be successful too. Do they recognize that the pie is, the pie needs to grow for everyone to grow? And, I've a lot of money from unions going in against me, $300,000 in the last mayor's cycle, which is a lot for a mayor of a, good sized village, but not Chicago, right? 60,000 people. And I met with a couple of different unions, and my analogy for them was always the same. It was, the problem is that I'm trying to make the pie this big, so big that you don't care if some non-union guy gets a job here, that you don't care. Their goal is a monopoly, and they would, if a choice of having 80% of this pie or 100% of this pie, they would 100% want this one every time, because they just want a monopoly. It's not about growing things for the best of their membership. So I think that's the last, the third piece of that is it's somebody that understands that we want to make the pie big enough for everybody. And if the pie is big enough for everybody, everyone in America can make a choice whether they want to be in a union, not in a union, because there's room for everyone if the pie is big enough.
One thing I mentioned too is that,
real quick, Aaron, Lee was trying to jump in. So go ahead, Lee.
I think they nailed the point, which is one of the ways I judge them is, are they focusing on issues that are important to their particular membership, or are they chasing after outside liberal goals? I mean, you could use CTU, which in my neck of the woods is seen as like, the worst among the worst. they're constantly fighting over issues that have very little impact on whether their teachers have good jobs and whether the children of Chicago are getting a good education. And to Chris's point earlier, you know, one of the biggest AFSCME unions in my area is our Department of Corrections. We have a prison in Dixon, and I'm telling you, those guys are pretty conservative. They like to shoot. They don't like crime. They're not a fan of probably the Safety Act. You know, so you got to take and look at it case by case. And the reason that local AFSCME group is like that is because they're reflecting their membership. Their membership, you know, is more conservative on a lot of those issues. And so rather than, you know, that's one of the ways I judge it. Are you advocating for your membership, or are you chasing, you know, part of a bigger, more organized, big labor, big union, you know, pro-liberal cause? Well, then I'm probably not going to be able to ally with you.
Well, and as a good example, you brought up CTU. I mean, there's a big difference between CTU and a lot of these local teachers unions that we work with on a regular basis, where they're just advocating for their teachers. And that's what the teachers union is supposed to do. And when a teachers union advocates for their teachers, sometimes we'll agree with them and sometimes we won't agree with them, but we can sit across the table and have a respectful conversation. When you get CTU, I mean, 10 out of 10 of the issues they put forward publicly are just from the far left progressive agenda that have nothing to do with schools, let alone teachers. So I think that's a pretty good point you made there, Lee. Aaron, why don't you close us down on this topic?
The one thing I wanted to mention is the thing that probably gives a lot of unions, bad name within Republican circles is when you see a group like the IEA going after two of our House members. You saw them go after Adam Nierberg, and they went after Blair Wilhauer down in Southern Illinois with primary candidates. When there really didn't need to be one. They created an environment where it became hostile, and then we had contested primaries. When you saw that, and you saw the division that were created within our own party, people don't like that, right? If you look at Matt Hall that was down there, I mean, I've been down to his county, and I've seen him in Fayette County. He's not a bad guy. When he's getting hundreds of thousands of dollars from the IEA to run against Blair Wilhauer, and when you see them try to get Jim Ackland to run against Adam Nierberg in that write-in race, that aggravates a lot of grassroots Republicans. And that gives those groups a lot of negative names. That's why you see guys like Tom DeVore coming out with that. And when you see the IEA being one of the biggest donors to a lot of the other state representatives in the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate, then they're going behind our backs and whacking at two of our own incumbents. How do you not get mad?
Well, and that's a good
great point. I had 69 grand spent in my primary, and it wasn't for me by the IEA. And so I'm going to get sworn in like, that's at the back of my mind. Try to work with these guys, but they just shelled out a max donation. So,
well, and that transitions us into the next topic. Keith, I want to go to you first on this next topic. So I'm going to just jump over here because I wanted to ask you specifically. You brought up the fact that the unions have spent significant amounts of money against you. And Lee, you brought up your own experience. Aaron shared a story. Yeah, that's a great transition into this topic of why should Republicans support unions when so few unions support Republicans? We just saw AFSCME come out with their endorsement list. They endorsed, looks like 3 Republicans on the list. And none of them are in tier 1 races. I mean, Santa Litro is, I guess, the closest to a tier 1 race, but not really. Nicola Ha is safe. They endorsed her. They endorsed Amy Elick, which is a great choice, but she's not in a tough race. Meanwhile, you look at some of the other union endorsements as well lately, and it's been almost exclusively Democrat. There's a few good ones. Local 150 has done a great job being more bipartisan. There's definitely some Republican or some unions that will work with both sides of the aisle, and I respect that. But the vast majority of them, you look at their endorsement list, it's almost exclusively Democrats. They're spending millions of dollars against Republicans. So the other side of this coin is, why should we as Republicans work with unions when they keep doing this to us? And Keith, you're on the front line, so I'll ask you straight up. I mean, we know we need to work with unions as a party, especially if we're going to win, but they really make it hard sometimes.
Well, so I would say there's a couple of things. One is to your point. I mean, there was 300 grand spent against me in the last race. And not only that, the head of the Chicago Federation of Labor, Bob Ryder, came to a board meeting, spoke on the board floor, waved some email he had and demanded answers. Then they used that in a lawsuit against me. And it turns out that email was completely fabricated and false. I mean, it was so that's the kind of tactics they use. So yeah, it really makes you mad. And it's like, I don't really want to work with unions. But the reason why, but Republicans have to separate the fact of union leadership and union members. And when I ran for Congress, I remember having this argument with the national party who wouldn't spend money in the Chicago part of my district. And I said, those are our voters. Those are the people. And, I end up tying there, but like, those are our voters. This is where we need to spend money, because we need to be talking to them because they align with us, but Republicans never go talk to them. And so they always go push D because they're in the habit of doing that. Once you can get them to start pushing R, they're going to be our voter because they agree with us on 95% of the issues.
Well, to your point on that, so I'm working with a couple independent candidates outside of Illinois, and you know what the first thing they do is they go to union households because they said union households are swing voters. They're willing to vote either way or vote independent. I mean, people understand this. Independent candidates know that your first place you go for swing voters is union households, working families. I mean, if they understand that, then to your point, Chris, it's the actual members that are absolutely gettable.
Right. So we need to go talk to those members, and we need to talk to them about our values and what we believe in. And that's what we need to be doing. And, we have to remember, if Illinois is going to change course and change to a red state, it is going to be the union households that have historically voted D because that's what they've been brought up to do, that move to our party because we actually represent their values. And once you can convince them of that, then they're going to be our voter. And as we continue to bring more, that's the only way to swing, in my opinion, to swing Illinois to us. It's not going to be the person who went to the Ivy League school who lives in Downers Grove. It's going to be the union worker, the union hardworking, trade unions, police officers, fire, etc., that they're going to be the ones that swing our way.
I keep telling Lane I want a around the horn ability to add points to people as they make really good points, and Keith would have just gotten a 10-point bump with that statement. Well done, my friend. Who else has thoughts?
Keith, I appreciate.
Go ahead. You go first, Chris.
Keith, I appreciate calling out the Ivy Leaguers in Downers Grove. It's one of my favorite things to do on this podcast. So certainly appreciate that one. There's like a subset to like the greater point here, but like one thing, like when you look at them, like trends in politics, what were the two areas where Darren Bailey did better than Rauner did in 2018? He did it downstate, which part of that was turnout, part of that was a lot of things. The other place where Darren Bailey did better than Rauner did was white working class communities and Hispanics in the southwest suburbs of Chicago. They're moving in our direction, even despite some of the candidates we're putting up sometimes that might not be the best. But, the working class voters are moving in our direction, and that can't be discredited. We can't only focus on like these upper middle class suburbanites. And while they're important to a coalition to win the state of Illinois at the statewide level, I think there's this idea within the minds of a lot of Republicans that like it's all the suburbs. We have to get 60% DuPage County to win. We have to win Southeast Lake County. You do that. You do need to do better in those areas, but it's also a matter of doing better with working class people. The other point I want to make, in terms of the grounder point of should Republicans work with unions, I believe there are many unions who they're not expecting 100% scores out of Republicans, and they understand that you're never going to get that. We had the national president of the Teamsters Union speak at the Republican National Convention and say that all these good Republicans in the Senate who were willing to sit down with him and work for bills like Josh Hawley and J.D. Vance and all these other people who, maybe their union score is 25, 30%, but they're willing to sit down and actually get props with unions because for so long, nationally, we were dealing with Republicans who weren't willing to sit down with them. And in Illinois, we had to deal with Bruce Rauner, who was just a disaster for courting working class families in labor unions. So if there's an ability to sit down and discuss the problem, understandably, there's some people who are very stubborn and they're not willing to negotiate at all. But I think with a lot of unions, if you're willing to sit down and talk through a lot of issues and give them some things, at least at the state level, they'll return the favor. We're seeing that with some of them, like 150.
But the question really is when. I mean, Michael, you and I have vented about this a lot. You've got Kevin Schmidt in District 114, who is one of the most pro-union people we've got down in Springfield. And then here we go, yet another union coming and endorsing LaToya Greenwood against him. Usually the argument is we like to support incumbents and we don't like to go, okay, Schmidt's the incumbent. Yes, I know Democrats have made him their number one target. I get that. But if you want to follow, if you want to actually put your neck out a little bit and say like, hey, Republicans, you work with us, we'll work with you, then shouldn't they be here in 114 endorsing Schmidt? But here we go, yet another union going in here for Greenwood to knock out Schmidt. So they're going against the incumbent Republican in a tier 1 race. I mean, this, you can't play window dressing. Don't give us a bunch of tier 2 and tier 3 endorsements. Hold on, don't give us a bunch of tier 3 endorsements and say you're playing with Republicans. Go out there and give us one tier 1 endorsement.
I think that you're looking at it in a silo, right? You're looking at it in a wind tunnel. You're saying, hey, in this specific race, they're not supporting our candidate. I think you need to be looking at it from a whole state holistic approach, right? The deals that might be made endorsing against Kevin down in that district might be made because they made a deal in Southside Chicago that they needed something. They said, hey, look, we'll give you this, but you need to go whack at your guy down over there.
I'm sure that's what they did.
Right. It's not just we like this guy, we don't like this guy. I mean, there's a lot of things that are in play that happen all over the place.
But to your point, Aaron, I looked at the whole list. Kevin's the only one on the list that I'm like, okay, you know what? Even objectively, you could have no arguments about this. I'm looking at the other list of Republicans they endorsed against. Personally, I have an objection. I think there's a bunch of Republicans on this list that are good for working families. But the one to me that stands out because he's an incumbent and he is very pro-union, if you aren't even going to endorse Schmidt, then again, I come back to the question, why should the Republican Party work with your unions if you can't even endorse an incumbent Republican who is pro-union? That's the question on the table.
Let's be realistic. There are certain unions that they're an arm of the Democratic Party here in Illinois. And we have to recognize that as Republicans and say, okay, that's not one to spend much time talking to. But we talk to their union members. We can't ignore their union members, right? And then the ones that will talk to us, will work with us, will be fair with those you talk to. But in all cases, you talk directly to the union member because that's what matters. They're the ones that vote.
Yeah, and to put the mayor's point onto the map, I mean, the state rep district immediately to my east, Liz Bishop, they mapped her after getting worried. They changed that map and connected the liberal area around DeKalb, cut out the west, east, north edges of DeKalb. My district actually has part of it to get the most liberal part, and then connected it through cornfields in a very unethical process to the union strongholds in LaSalle, Ottawa, Peru. Well, that map is based on the fact that they believe they control those union households, and why we need to work with them. And to the mayor's point, getting into that at the household, at the worker level, explaining why we're better is if Liz is able to break what Democrats hope is an alliance between these liberal elites who don't, quite frankly, care about the ramifications of their policy on working families down in LaSalle, Ottawa, Peru, then Republicans and Liz win that district. And going back even farther, our last Republican governor, who shall go unnamed, initially did pretty well in his first time in Republican or in union households, to the shock of some of the unions. Now, they also helped get him out of office when he disappointed him a little. But the point is, when you can work with them at the household level, then some of the local unions will even come around at the leadership level. You'll never get the ones that are, an arm of the Democratic Party, but you're going to take out some seats. And Liz Bishop is one of those candidates who can do it.
Kudos on the 76th example. I'll have Lane bring that up on screen, the map, so everybody knows exactly what that district is. But you're absolutely right. I mean, that is a very diverse district between, college town, liberal, suburban versus working class. And if we're going to do what Keith said, and we're going to turn the state around by winning working families, it's probably right in the 76 that we're going to learn just how close or far we are from that goal. So good call out, Lee. I like that.
Well, to the Kevin Schmidt point, since you brought that up, he had sent me a list of some of the endorsements that he's gotten so far this cycle earlier today. And I would say there's basically 2.5 unions on there. There's the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police, Local 150, which we've talked about that extensively. And he also got the endorsement of the Illinois Retired Teachers Association. So I would say that one's kind of quasi-union, because their big issue mostly is, pension, retirement, some of those kind of issues that kind of fall in line with some of the same arguments that these unions are making. But we're making some progress there. I think especially in towns like Caseyville and Granite City, which are in that Erica Harris district. We've seen a shift there. That those are kind of union areas in the Metro East. And Erica put up some pretty good numbers in both of those. communities. So we just need to keep, working on that. And I think it'll pay dividends, like, has been suggested over the course.
Well, the other side of this coin is you look at Democrats in this state, and especially Illinois. My question really is, how much do they actually support unions? There's a tried and true tactic down in Springfield that was actually called out. One of the political blogs actually posted this article. I'll give them kudos. They actually admitted this. Back in 2021, an article was written that talked about how progressive organizations use technical objections in order to basically union bust in this state to make it look like they're not. We're seeing that right now with Chris Welch. Something that I've wanted to talk about a few weeks now is during the DNC in their press gaggles every day when the press went to a bunch of people and got them to talk about random things. And there were a lot of quotes in there that frankly gave insight that I think some Democrats never should have done. And one of those was an interview with Harman. Harman, in an interview, admitted that the bill that was passed by the House to allow Speaker Welch's staff to unionize was completely flawed, and that they knew that it was flawed. Harman, essentially, if you look at the quotes that he made, he admitted that Welch knew the bill was never a good bill. It was never going to pass. He just did it to make it look like he was doing something to support his staff unionizing. Every step of the way, Welch has stopped his staff from unionizing. If Democrats are so pro-union in this state, then why the hell isn't Welch out there being the champion for his staff to unionize? We see that with the ACLU. They picketed in the last week because their staff has been trying to unionize since 2021 and haven't been able to do it. We see right now you've got union leaders that are in ASME who are really angry because the Illinois Central Management Services, CMS, is causing all sorts of issues with them being able to hire, and it's holding down their membership. You're seeing this all across the board, that the policies of the Democrats in the state, or even their direct actions, are frankly entirely anti-union. They give lip service to being pro-union, but their actions are the exact opposite. It's good for you, right? You rich people can go pay for the unions, but I'm not going to pay for it. I'm just going to talk about how great unions are. And it's a certain point, this dam has got to bust.
Well,
I think part of that comes down to that Democrats have power right now. I think there's a lot of unions that if Republicans got a little better at winning, wouldn't feel so pressured to throw money so heavily at the Democrats and their door knockers, whoever. They feel they need to cater to them because they have power, and Democrats have gotten really good at abusing that, and sometimes abusing the unions in the process.
Right, and that's kind of because somebody said that like the unions can be an arm of the Democratic Party. That's certainly the case in some situations. I would also label unions as kind of hostages of the Democratic Party because they have so much power in this state. They have, like, Chris Welch has the ability to go to the trade unions and say, this actually happened. I want my wife to become a Cook County judge. You're going to bankroll her campaign. And if you don't, you're not going to get anything down in Springfield. That actually happened. You can look up the financial reports and see that's exactly what happened. And then the unions, in turn, get almost nothing in return. They got they got Amendment 1. They got the Workers' Rights Amendment. They got that. But over the last few years, especially since Welch has become Speaker, unions increasingly aren't really getting anything in the state. They'll go to Welch and the leadership and say, hey, we want, this passed, or like we want, carbon capture. That was one thing that the unions were really high on downstate. Didn't really get anywhere down in Springfield. And they're continuously getting beaten over the head by leadership down in Springfield, but they really can't afford to go completely into the Republican Party, because if the AFL-CIO tomorrow said, hey, we're going to donate $2 million to the Republican Party to take out the Democrats, well, frankly, we've seen how the Republican Party does in the state. That would be terrible because Republicans would lose. And then they would be even worse they would be even worse graces with leadership down in Springfield. So Lee makes a fantastic point. A lot of this is simply based around power. And if the Republican Party could win seats, could take back the chambers, could take back the governorship with people willing to work with the unions, I guarantee the unions would start giving them money too.
Interesting. All right. So go out there and win some races, and then maybe we'll see this change. Mm-hmm. It's a fair point. Keith, you're muted.
Yeah. So, Chris, I guess I think that's hopeful and wishful thinking in some degrees. As a sitting mayor, who you look at what we've done in our town, like just this year alone, 2 projects worth $24 million. increased our road spending. So $32 million between our road spending and those two projects alone, plus other stuff. All of those are large projects, all union, all because they're large projects, right? All the general contractors are union signatories, so they're all union, they're all prevailing wage, right? And a lot of trades on those. And yet, and the same thing was happening the last 8 years. And yet, in the last election, 300 grand and the head of the CFL coming and trying to submarine me with a fabricated email. And it doesn't seem to matter how we act and what we do. And we've won elections here. It doesn't matter.
What I would say simply is that there is an exception in that I believe the president of CFL has an unhealthy obsession with you, and he believes in things.
He may be more into Keith than Keith's own wife is.
Right. Ryder is into Ryder feels that what is it? A medical assistant dying, assisted suicide. He thinks that's an important issue for union households. So I'll kind of put Ryder off to the side here a little bit and say I think he has unhealthy obsessions with certain issues and but I think overall, in general, and we see this in some suburban counties like Will and DuPage and even Lake to some extent, that when Republicans possess a bit of power, local unions are.
Yeah, you see it. Okay, and Chris, to your point, you see it in Sangamon County too.
Right.
And I think the closer you are to Chicago, the more they're likely to lean into the Democrats. I mean, I had trade unions, everybody, donating a little bit of money against me the first time I ran for mayor. And by the end, they weren't donating to me, but we were working together on a lot of projects. But I'm further enough away from Chicago that I think their overwhelming need to appease the powers that be out of that city kind of ebbs. I don't know if that's true as you go further south, but at least they weren't hostile to me, which I'll take as a win, I guess.
Keith, I want to talk to one more thing on this topic, which is you mentioned this earlier about growth and what you're doing in Orland Park. You look at the state of Illinois, the flash index just came out and Illinois has declined for the fourth straight month, but it's worse than that. It's been on a steady decline since March of 2022. That's what measures growth for our economy in this state. And you see our unemployment rate is among the highest in the whole country at 5.2%. You're just seeing all these signs of our economy and the lack of growth in this state. And I think your point was a solid one from before, which is, Republican policies, conservative policies were about growth, and that benefits these trade unions. We want to invest. Republicans, when we had power in DC, what was one of the first things we wanted to do? Invest in our roads, invest in our infrastructure. For many of these unions, it's Republicans who tend to be best for their jobs, their pocketbooks, and for their futures. We don't do a good enough job making that point that, the growth that we bring. You talk about those economic projects that you've brought to Orland Park. That's good for unions. That's good for union households, good for union workers. I don't think Republicans as a party do a good enough job making that point. Because the Democratic policies ain't doing great for our economy. That's for damn sure.
Find another place in Cook County that's growing like Orland Park is, from both population's growing slowly, but it's growing. Anyone that's growing, households or home building or new construction for commercial is not in Cook County, right? They're further west,
I don't know,
where it's cheaper, right? So where else is that happening? And it's happening because we're doing a good job here.
It's happening in Palatine. We have all Republican township
but Aaron,
government here.
I'm going to let you make your point for sure, but I'm going to point out Palatine is also led by good, reasonable, fiscally responsible, fiscally conservative leaders, just like Orland Park is. So I think you're a mirror image. Go ahead and make your point.
No, I would argue that in Palatine, we've had significant growth. Our economy has really been bustered. We've lowered taxes. If you look at our Cook County bill, and compared to, not saying Orland, but to other places in our county, you would see that there's been a reduction in our local government taxing on the actual levy. Yeah, on the levy, right? Because we're doing a good job, and that's what you have when you have a fully Republican township, both all trustees, highway commissioner, supervisor, clerk, and assessor. We're fortunate enough to have a very strong Republican commitment out here in Palatine Township. But as we're going through, one of the things I think we have to understand is that, look, a lot of times in Illinois, Republicans have brought a Swiss Army knife to a gunfight. And when we get a little bit of control and we get a little bit more say and get out of a one-party system and get, out of the super minorities in both the House and the Senate, I think that the unions will start working with us. We cannot expect union leaders and membership, either or of them, to be the tip of the spear to go to the Democrats and say, oh, you guys are bad government. They don't care about Republican. They don't care about Democrat. They care about their union membership. That's what keeps the leaders in power, just like any other political organization. And I think when you saw the speaker from the Teamster at the RNC convention, he made a very compelling point. He's like, we're not red, we're not blue, we're not independent, we're pro-union. And if we adapt pro-union policies in certain areas of Illinois that, that's good government, I think we'll get a lot more support. And when we have a bigger say and we're not, just brushed aside like we are today, then we'll get more support. Until then, we have to pick up the breadcrumbs where they are, because we're never getting a piece of the pie.
So I'm going to jump on something you said there, Aaron. I think we need to get the union members on our side, and then they will elect leadership that represents them. Right? That's the key, because trying to go top down isn't going to work.
Of course.
Because the members, I believe, I in my district, in Congressional District 6, I can tell you the union members, the majority of them agree with us more than they agree with the Democratic Party. Probably a large majority, but we're not reaching them. And we've got to continue to reach them and bring them to our side. And then they will eventually start to get their leadership to represent them. And then their leadership will talk to us.
We need to do the same thing that we need to do in Illinois. We need to do within labor homes. We need to start working with our grassroots, your grassroots labor union membership, your grassroots Republicans, the guy down the street, the people that go to our parades, that go to our Lincoln Day dinners, that put lawn signs in the ground, that show up to our monthly meetings, that be it in Palos or in Palatine. Those are the groups, just like you're saying. And we need to have, maybe within the Illinois Republican Party, have a union outreach or some sort of committee or something that we at least have a way to reach out to those groups.
Absolutely, we should.
Yeah. We should talk to some people on the state party and see if we can make that happen.
Yeah, co-chairman being on the podcast might be a good start. I like it. All right, we want to get into a couple union topics here, but we're not going to cover all of them. A few of these were specific to a guest we previously were going to have on, who had a lot of insights into them, and I'm not going to make you guys talk about them when that guest wasn't able to join us. So we're not going to cover all these union topics because we got some political topics we definitely need to get into, but we're going to hit a couple. First one, just because I think we've got some Bears fans here, so we got to talk about this. During another thing that happened during the convention, the Democratic convention, that we haven't had a chance to talk about is you mentioned Ryder, a couple of you guys, and Tim Dre from this AFL-CIO have once again brought up that they're still pushing for public funding for sports stadiums, especially for the Chicago Bears. So we got to talk about it. I mean, this is obviously a labor issue that they really want to see happen. We're not in power. It's not our job to make this happen in Springfield. It's Pritzker's and the Democrats. And again, we talk about labor leaders not getting what they want out of Pritzker and the Democratic leaders. They want a stadium. They want the jobs that come with a stadium, and Democrats ain't giving it to them.
I would be the first one to say that I am all for a brand new Bears stadium, as long as it's not in Arlington Heights. I live in Palatine, and I want to be able to get home when Taylor Swift's in town, right? 53, 290, and 90 are way too tight. And I don't want to have an hour and 45-minute drive to get back to my house from one of those major veins. So if they want to build it down on the lakeshore, God bless them. I don't want to have to pay for it, but I do not want it in Arlington Heights.
See, I'd take the increase in my property values if they came out here. So I'd happily make that trade.
So that, it's great that they want to support that. And you understand why they want to, because it's a whole bunch of contractor jobs for several years. So you can understand why they want it. The issue is they don't understand the big picture. If Illinois was doing well as an economy and Illinois was doing well as a state, they could help projects like this. But because of the policies that Bob Ryder and the AFL-CIO, leadership have supported, we have an Illinois economy that is circling the drain and can't support these projects. Why can Orland Park do these projects in Orland Park? Because we have a good economy and we have a well-run government. And that's why we can do that. So they should start looking at the big picture and start supporting policies that help Illinois recover economically. And then these projects would happen without a lot of push from them.
Fair.
Can I mention one thing? I was in Oklahoma City for work on a tourism group, and they built an Olympic rowing center in Oklahoma City. And what they did is they said, hey, we're going to do a referendum. We're going to do it for 3 years. Then it's going to sunset. And once we raise enough money, we're going to build this facility because it's going to bring tourism dollars. It's going to bring economic impact to the area. And that's what they did. They did the referendum. The referendum passed. They saved the money for 3 years. They didn't have to borrow against it. They went and they built their brand new facility. It was a multi-million-dollar facility. Right after that happened, that tax and that referendum expired. They went back right next time, the next voting cycle, and they said, we want to build an additional velodrome for biking, right? Very similar to the rowing one that we already had. And we're going to referendum and we're going to hold the money for 3 years and then we're going to build it because we don't want a loan against it. And guess what? It passed by 85%. Do you want to know why? 2 reasons. Number one, they did it and they said, this is what we're going to tax for. This is when we're going to spend it, how we're going to spend it, and this is when it's going to expire. That's why. Number two is they built the trust of the people because they did what they said they were going to do, right? If they wanted to go in Illinois and said, hey, we're going to have a referendum and we're going to save for 5 years in the city of Chicago on property taxes or income tax or whatever tax that they wanted to do, entertainment tax, and say, we're going to do that for 5 years and then we're going to build the stadium, and then they actually did that, then the tax went away, I think there would be a lot more support for publicly funded projects. But that doesn't happen, right? The Chicago government doesn't operate that way. They don't believe in good government. So they just keep on borrowing on the backs of the residents. And look, right now, they got over $1 billion hole. They're not going to be able to fill, right, in Chicago. And they're going to have to do it by doing a property tax increase. There's not enough millionaires and billionaires in Chicago to put that bill onto it. And if they see that bill coming, they're going to do a Ken Griffin and they're going to leave, right? So what happens? There's more, you know what I mean, in middle-class families in Chicago that are going to have to be burdened with that weight because of bad government. And now on top of that, Mayor Johnson wants a publicly funded, taxpayer-funded stadium after doing a property tax increase. What are we talking about here?
Well, there's absolutely a trust problem here. I mean, voters do not trust government at most levels of the state. Maybe they do a little bit in Palatine Township, maybe in Orland, but in most areas of the state, there's a significant lack of trust in government, and for good reason. So I think you've made a pretty solid point, Aaron. I also just love, I put this out on Facebook, but haven't had a chance to talk about it on the podcast. But if anybody watched Hard Knocks, which was one of the most boring seasons of Hard Knocks that there ever was, but you had in episode 3, you had Kevin Warren and his team sitting around a table picking out the seating layout for their suites. Like, they don't even have a location, they don't have funding, but they're at the level in their design to be picking out the seating layout of suites. Like, if you're designing a stadium, that's way down the list. That means they've already done most of the rest of the design, and they're now on the minutia. And it's so tone deaf. They don't have a location, they don't have funding, they don't have support for actually doing this. I mean, you want to talk about part of the reason why this isn't happening. It isn't just government; it's also just the ineptitude of the Bears team. But we're kind of used to that as Chicago Bears fans. For those of us who are Bears fans,
go Pack, go.
I think my only input is economic development is a lot easier to support when your state isn't deeply in debt. That's true whether you're a municipality. It's true, as our state. When I was preparing for the budget, about 19% of our budget is pension payments, debt payments, catch-up payments. The average state is about 4 to 5%. So that 15% difference is about $8 billion. And that $8 billion, you talk about more money for early education, you talk about money for infrastructure, you talk about money for economic development, that's where it is. It's spent in debt, catch-up. And when you look at something like Region 2, I was just hearing IDOT give some of their numbers for what they're going to be investing into transportation. They're spending about, I want to say it was $270 million this year for all of District 2, about $1.9 billion for the next whole 5 years. And then you turn around taxpayers and say, we're going to spend about that much just on this one thing over here. That argument gets very, very hard to make. And that's the problem they're running into. Even Democrats are looking at it and saying, oh, we don't have money for this. It's just much easier to fund economic development when you have a healthy budget.
Let's talk about another union issue. This is a little bit out towards you, Lee. I don't think you definitely don't have the actual, this actual district, but it's close to you. Let's talk about the Belvidere assembly plant. Pritzker got massive press, not just statewide, but nationally, for saving that plant. He got all sorts of press for it. And then it's crickets when it comes out that actually right now UAW is threatening to strike because Stellantis is delaying the opening of that plant because of economic challenges. And those delays, I mean, the rumor is those delays ain't going to be short delays. And Pritzker's skirting responsibility for that. He gets all the credit for saving the plant. Lots of union jobs in that plant, lots of union jobs in that town. But now when it comes out that actually because of economic reasons and the lack of a good economic climate in the state, actually Stellantis is like, yeah, it actually doesn't make sense for us to put any money there. That if Pritzker gets the praise for saving the plant, then he's got to get the scorn for, frankly, what has been now a failure. That plant is still sitting closed. And that needs to be at Pritzker's feet. But we can't just give him all the praise for, some great deal on paper that looks like it's going to save jobs. If it never actually comes to fruition, then he's going to have to eat that. And, the Democratic run media in the state will probably give him a pass, but we certainly aren't going to do that.
Probably.
Yeah.
Problem with having a billionaire for a governor is he can afford a lot of propaganda, hundreds of millions into campaigns and mailers and ads. And there's times he has just changed the narrative because he's flooded it with money. So if something positive happens, you're going to see it everywhere. And if something negative happens, as you mentioned, crickets. The truth of the matter is, both at the national level with Biden's Bidenomics, as he likes to call it, and the inflationary issues that's caused, and in Illinois, where we're just not addressing our structural debts properly, and where our budgets were floated by federal money through COVID, and now that's dissipating. The underpinnings are still bad, and businesses are still going to look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we absolutely want that plant to be open. Let's be clear. That plant and the jobs and the working families that supports, not just in Belvidere, but the entire Rockford region, it is massive for our Northern Illinois economy. So it absolutely needs to happen. But the point here is Pritzker needs to stop running for president. He needs to stop going. I mean, next week he's going to Iowa. Like, where's the full court press here to save that plant? Where is Pritzker now that the plant's actually not being reopened? He was big when it was Biden and UAW, and it was big in the national politics. But guess what, buddy? It's time to actually show up. You weren't there at the DuQuoin State Fair. You're going to Iowa next week. Belvidere and the whole Rockford region needs you here for this plant, and nothing's happened. And nobody's holding Pritzker accountable for it.
Unless it's in his blind trust and he's making money from it, he ain't showing up.
Or a Chinese battery maker owned by the Communist Party, then they get a big taxpayer handout, right?
Maybe we should try to take the Belvidere plant and open a Golden Corral next to it. Maybe we'll get a little bit more, people to come out and check it out.
You had it great, and then you didn't. You pansied out at the end and didn't get the joke to land. Could have been good, man. Could have been good. You lose 5 points for that. Come on.
All right, fair enough.
Come on. All right, let's go to some political topics. We can't be, we're in the final stretch here. Everybody knows in politics, after Labor Day, this is the final 2-month sprint towards Election Day. So we can't have a podcast and not talk politics. So for the remainder of the episode, we're going to talk about some political things. First things first, as people have been seeing in the campaign disclosure reports, spending has ramped up significantly, especially by House Republicans, House Democrats. House Republicans are starting to spend significantly on mail. They're also starting to spend on digital throughout the state. We're seeing that come through. House Democrats, meanwhile, are spending a crap ton on mail. In some of these districts, they've spent put out as many as 11 mailers already. At least that's been reported. So I apologize to anybody who lives in those districts. Sheesh, 11 mailers by Labor Day. I can only imagine what the next 2 months are going to look like. But money's starting to be spent. Just want to open it up in general to anybody who may have thoughts. Probably Chris and Michael will have most of our thoughts on this, but if anybody who's reviewed the list of who's being backed and who's not being backed and where the money's going, where it's not going, feel free to jump in. I've got some thoughts, but I want to let you guys go first.
Yeah, they dropped $144,000 worth of mail in Katie Stewart's district already. That's 11 mailers, 144,000. This must be the Democratic caucus's playbook now, because I remember during the primary when they were trying to take out Mary Flowers for some reason, they dropped 30 pieces of mail during the course of the primary. It was some absurd amount of money. These vendors
some Dem staffer is best buddies or getting a commission or something because they love their mail.
And I understand they have the money to do this, and they're you can tell they're targeting this pretty minutely, because 11 mailers for $144,000. It's not really a very big universe. They're probably targeting a very specific demographic of people, but still 11 mailers. At a given point, you'd think that you'd reach the rate of diminishing returns with mail, but up until this point, the House Dems are basically shown that they're capable of winning in any year that's not 2022. So 2022's primary, I should add. So good for the Democratic vendors.
You're right. It is a Dem strategy. I mean, we live in the 8th Congressional District, and Raja has sent my wife probably 8 or 9 pieces of franked mail in just the last month. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous how much mail we're getting from Raja, all paid for by taxpayers, of course. I mean, this is definitely part of the strategy here to just bury people in mail months from election day. If you got the money, I guess more power to you. But the only people winning out in this, USPS is making out on the postage, and whoever's getting the profit on the mailers is doing pretty well. But other than that, I mean, this is a lot of burned cash 3 months out.
Yeah, it's like 144,000 for Katie Stewart, 144,000 for Mary Beth Canty, which is
not a district that's really much in play. I mean, Suzanne Ness, they're spending a ton of money on.
And they're dropping digital in the Marty McLaughlin district, which makes sense. But you'd think they'd be dropping mail there first. Maybe postage is slightly more expensive there, but I can't imagine that
postage is always the same no matter where it is.
Right. Like I can't imagine the Democratic Party cares about the postage rate in any given distinction. So if you're a voter in any of these targeted districts, and I'm not, I live in Justin Slaughter, just like Keith, so we're not getting any mail. But just be prepared for your shredder. It's going to be a fun time.
And it seems like just kind of like what Chris was alluding to on, 11 mailers for Katie Stewart, but a, total bill of $144,000. They're being much more targeted with this, probably sending it to a smaller universe. You're not going to send out 11 mailers, spend $144,000 and hit, a wide range of people. I mean, in the Latoya district last election, when Kevin was running against her and, ultimately beat her, I had gotten some of those Latoya mailers that cycle, even though obviously I voted in every Republican primary that I've been able to. And I was getting mailers then, but I haven't got a single mailer from her campaign this cycle, but I have seen some other people that have. So I think they're getting a little more targeted. Kevin Schmidt's been doing a lot of franked mail to this point, and I would imagine, as we get a little closer, that's the power of incumbency. He can do that, and then we'll kind of shift, hopefully, to some other mail. I heard that Keevan's going to be going up on digital here pretty soon. They were kind of finalizing that plan against Katie Stewart. So people are going to be inundated. I mean, especially if you live in some of these targeted districts from both sides.
Now, looking at the list of candidates that they are putting out mail for or digital ads for, a couple things stood out to me. First, some of the safe districts that they're playing in. Chris, you mentioned Mary Beth Canty. Obviously, Michelle Hunter's awesome in that district, and I certainly hope she does well, but that's not a tier 1 target. It's probably not even a tier 2 target at this point. Yet they're dumping a bunch of money for Canty. They're putting a bunch of money in Mason's district. I don't have the list in front of me. I think that's 61, might be 62, but and again, Mason's not even on the list of targeted races for us. Mara Hirschauer, they're putting a bunch of money behind. She's also in a safe district. It was interesting that they're putting money in some of these safe districts, but they're not putting money against Nicole Laha in 82, Jennifer Sanalitro in 48. We've been saying for a while that we don't think Laha and Sanalitro are in trouble based on the fact that Democrats are really not even spending money in those districts. I think they're even admitting that those two seats, 82 and 48, just aren't really actually in play, despite the fact that publicly they say we're going to be playing in those districts. That stood out to me.
Well, I think, that's obviously, if they're sending mail in some of these districts, I would imagine that those decisions are based on data that they have, whether that's polling.
Well, they just polled. We talked about it last episode. They just did all the polling in these districts.
So if you're in one of these districts and, you hear people of, hey, my Democrat state rep is sending out, 10 mailers already, and it's, 3 days after Labor Day, maybe you need to get out and knock some doors or do something, because there's something under the surface that the Democrats are worried about. Maybe you don't flip that one this time, but maybe you lay the groundwork for next time. If they're sending out mail and doing digital in districts that, weren't really on our radar, I mean, maybe that's a sign that they've got some data that shows that there's at least some level of concern.
Yeah. Other thing that stood out to me, go ahead.
The way to counteract the mailboxes is knocking doors. Like if they've seen the candidate or their team face to face, and you're sending out 11 mailers, you've mitigated a lot of that. So, to those candidates who are getting pummeled with that stuff right now, use it as inspiration for your grassroots door knocking team. TV is a different animal. I won't speak to that, but certainly mailers, people will just easily discount mailers, especially if they got 11 of them, if they've met the candidate and shook his hand at their door. It's just a different animal.
Fair. Another thing that stood out to me was just of all the digital ads they're running, they're all positive except for one. The only candidate they've gone negative against is Jackie Haas. which to me speaks to the fact that what we've been saying for a long time, Haas is going to be incredibly difficult to beat in 79. Democrats really want to push Billy Morgan, and that's fine, but we've been saying Haas is really well liked in that district. She works it. People know her. People like her. I think Democrats are admitting that. You don't go negative on Haas and do positive for everybody else, all the other Democrats. What they're telling you is Haas's positives, her name ID is high enough that the only way they're going to win is if they beat her up. And so the fact that that's the only negative ad of all the positive ads that they're running, I think it's another sign. Again, you got to look to what your opponents are doing to know their strategy and know what they're saying. They're telling you there that Haas's numbers are strong and that they're never going to win in that district unless they beat her up and raise her negatives. One last thing that I saw, and this is just something that stood out to me that I kind of laughed about, but if you watch those videos, which again, I have no life, so I've watched them all. You watch the Maria Peterson ad, which Maria Peterson is running here in the suburbs in our district here, trying to knock out Marty McLaughlin in 52. And if you watch that video, I encourage you guys to go watch it. At the very end, it's clear she's reaching into like her husband or something, but they don't give that context. So at the end of the ad, she reaches herself into a car and gives a lip kiss to some random dude. Again, without context, it just looks really weird and creepy if you're watching the video, because she's like shaking hands and smiling and talking to people. At the end of the video, she just reaches in and lip kisses some random guy. Again, I assume it's her husband or something.
That was me,
but again,
Colin.
if you don't
I
give
wanna
that
be
context
honest,
in the video, it just comes across really weird.
And it was really hot. That was me. And so I went to the other side at one time, but no, here's the funny thing. Maria Peterson is, she ran against Dan McConchie in the last Senate cycle in 2022 and lost by like 1.5 points. So she's coming back. Her campaign manager is Nabella Saeed, who's the state representative that is the incumbent in the 51st, which comes through Palatine all the way up into Lake Zurich. We have a strong candidate running against her in there, but Maria Peterson is being really active in the area. Marty McLaughlin has now got his street team up. He's hitting the mail. He's hitting a lot of those different pieces that he needs to hit, and they're hit it really hard. I think he retains that seat, but I think that, one thing you haven't mentioned yet is that right now, after Labor Day, is when a lot of these campaigns are really beginning. And I know that there was a lot of polls that were in the field that are just coming in right now. And I think that you're going to see a lot more negative ads against a lot of the Republican incumbents, as well as some of the insurgent Republican candidates that are coming out. I think there's 3 or 4 candidates that we're going to see on our side that are going to start getting whacked at in the next month and a half, because I think they're going to be challenging the Democrats in all those areas. Jennifer Santalitra that you talked about, I think that, she's a pretty safe area. Nicola Ha, who's doing really well down there. I think it's not going to be too long before they start chipping away at her. Maybe not because they think they can beat her in this cycle, but maybe because they think they can take her out in 2026 in the cycle after. And I think they're just going to kind of
we just haven't seen
tenderize that.
Yeah.
They just haven't seen it yet, but I think you will, because I think she's pretty strong in that area.
Okay, we'll see. A couple other districts I want to talk about. Let's shift over to 76. Lee, I know this is a big one you've brought up. Republicans have come out hard and slammed Amy Murri Briel, the Democratic nominee for that seat. We've known for a long time this is coming. So Briel, some of this I've been sworn to secrecy, so I haven't been able to talk about it. But she has a Heartland Mamas podcast that she's on, and she has said a bunch of really stupid things in that podcast that we knew were going to be able to be used against her pretty effectively. And they've come out with a pretty powerful video ad against Briel in that district. She's made statements like, "We don't even need police anymore. We talk about defunding the police." Exactly right. May not be a bad idea to just remove sheriff's departments. These are all quotes from that podcast that she has. And that's not going to play. I mean, that doesn't even play. Heck, you get closer to the city, even in your area, Keith and Chris, that doesn't play. It sure as heck doesn't play as you get out to the 76th district. That definitely does not play there. So that video, I mean, the production quality, I'm going to say House Republicans could up their game a bit. I'm just going to be fair. It was not a great ad itself, but the content was powerful. There's a lot that Briel's going to have to deal with. She is way too far left for that district. And if Republicans can up their game and use those hits even more effectively, Liz Bishop may shock some people in House District 76.
Gosh, imagine if the House Republicans had money and could spend and put it into the production value of that ad. That would be such a powerful.
You don't need money. I mean, that ad was done in like iMovie in somebody's basement.
I know, but like,
you
imagine,
don't have to go spend $10,000 to make an ad, but you could do more than $5.
I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt and calling it a money issue here, Colin. Last time I give the House Republicans benefit of the doubt. You know what? You could have spent $20 and done better production, but the content was fantastic. Keep that coming, but God, find a better editor, please.
And this isn't the end. I mean, she said a lot of dumb things. She's got a quote saying inflation is not a bad thing. She apologized saying we're American capitalistic pigs. This one hasn't made, I don't know if maybe they just think this is a little taking it too far, but she compared our policing system she's saying it's designed and functioned after slave patrols. I mean, there are definitely more juicy quotes that you haven't seen made it to ads yet that are absolutely potentially going to come out, and there's more. She just has said some crazy far left things on that podcast, and it's going to come back to bite her.
She does not match that district, and if they keep the theme around that instead of trying to dig in deep into any one particular issue and instead just create a pattern of a theme of she does not represent that district. She is far too left for that district. Going back to union households, they don't want to get rid of their sheriff's department. They don't want to get rid of their public safety. They don't want to get rid of their Second Amendment. And she doesn't match that. I've been hearing that for a long time, and now we're seeing it. I'm like, oh man, they were correct. She does not match that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about two more districts before we close down today, both closer to Chris and Keith's region down there. Number one is Senate District 40. So Senate Republicans, Chris flagged this. They're up with a video for our candidate, Phil Nagle, against Patrick Joyce in 40. We talk about production quality. That ad is a much better production quality from the Senate Republicans. Chris, what'd you think about that video, and what are you thinking about that district? I mean, I know it'll be tough for Republicans, but for the Senate Republicans, that's really one of the few districts they have to play in. So I love to see him at least going out there and showing some fight.
Yeah, props to the Senate Republicans. I mean, it's really a hard cycle for them to screw up because there's really only gains on the table. There aren't any losses or holds that they have to worry about. They're putting their money into Patrick Joyce's district, which is by the numbers the smartest play for them. Very good quality production on this ad. I believe it's going up on TV. I'm not sure of that. And the only gripe I have with the ad is that they're using the old, funded by the party bosses, and it shows Madigan, Ed Burke, and like Brandon Johnson. It's like I know. I just like
we can't quit that. We always go back to that. It's like our main tool in our toolbox.
But other than that, I thought the ad was great.
They hit on cost of living. They hit on some of the key issues that are working with voters. They definitely have polling data, and they're following it in terms of what issues are moving voters. I mean, it's in terms of, I give it an 8 out of 10. It's a good quality starting ad there. And again, we've got two races there. We'll talk about the next one, Harry Benton, next. But you've got Patrick Joyce and Harry Benton. You've got two Democrats who claim to be moderates, claim to be more conservative, not politicians. For anybody who lives down in that region who has to work with them, they're full-on Democrats. They've supported a lot of the tax and spend policies of the Democrats, the progressive movement, and kudos to the Republicans for calling them out on it.
Yeah, I think Joyce is frankly a little bit of a tougher option to take out just because his old man was a state senator. He's been around for a very long time, and he has made some choice votes on a number of different bills. But by the numbers, there is no reason why Patrick Joyce should be safe. And the Senate Republicans are making a wise decision playing in that district. I think Phil Nagle already is running a much better campaign than he ran in 2022. Joyce, it's going to be, no matter what happens, the 40th Senate district is going to be much closer than it's been in previous elections. That much I can definitely say.
Nice. That's good to know. Moving over here to Harry Benton, House District 97. I gave a little bit of shade to House Republicans for the low quality ad they did in 76. I want to give them kudos here because I always like to be fair. They came out with a press release pushing back against Harry Benton, who, if you guys have seen in our podcast, Benton came out with this "I'm not a politician" theme with his ads, despite running for office 4 times. They're calling out his hypocrisy, calling him politician, Harry Benton, typical Springfield politician. A lot of really good language there. Calling him out for falling right in line with Springfield Democrats and special interests. He claimed to back the blue, but then voted for or didn't oppose the Safety Act. He claimed he'd hold the line on taxes and spending, but then voted for a big tax increase, $1 billion tax increase, and an overspending budget at 3 a.m. Promised to support jobs, but didn't. Gave himself a pay raise. Kudos for House Republicans. It was a great press release. We obviously are going to see more than just the press release, but again, kudos to them. That was really good pushback, and they're using some really good themes and good messaging in that, with some quotes from Butler, the HRO political director. So kudos to them. Some pushback, because Benton claiming that he's not a politician when he's run for office that many times, when he's an incumbent state representative, is kind of BS, or not just kind of, it is BS. So glad to see the House Republicans calling that out.
Yeah, frankly, Harry Benton's had some of the better messaging coming out of the House Democrats over the past couple of cycles. He's a new kind of Democrat. And frankly, that's what I think a lot of people want to hear, because I do think there's a subset of people in the middle in terms of ideology, who do want would like to support a Democrat, even as long as they're not like one of those crazy far left Democrats. And that's been Benton's messaging since he started running for office. So this was a good strategy for the House Republicans. They need to start breaking down and tearing down some of that messaging that Benton's been using. A lot of it's very true. Benton has been a very standard Democrat down in Springfield. There have been a couple bills he opposed related to the budget and stuff like that. But other than that, he's been a pretty staple Democrat down in Springfield. It's one of the most in-play districts for the Republicans to pick up in the House if they're going to pick up any seats. So it's good strategy to try and focus on that one. Gabby Shannon's been raising a little bit more money lately, so let's make that one a race. I said way back last year, if there was any race that was sneakily in play, it was 97. So please do not prove me wrong yet again, House Republicans.
And Shanahan's working hard out there knocking on doors. I love to see it. All right, so before we close down, I have a feeling this one's going to set off some of our guests. Keith, Lee, and Aaron have all been serving in public office, nonpartisan public office in various roles, and I really want to hear what they had to say about this. There's a story that hasn't gotten a lot of play out of Kane County that I think needs a spotlight, so we're going to talk about it. The Democratic County Board chair there, I don't want to say her last name wrong, Corrine, and it's Perot, but I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, so forgive me for butchering it. But basically, the King County Republicans and others have been passing out flyers against her outside county headquarters, which I love. Guerrilla-style political tactics. It's how we're going to win. And so what does she do? She creates a First Amendment zone and requires that if you're going to be politicking at all outside the building, you must be in that First Amendment area, as she calls it. So locks down anybody's ability to pass out flyers outside their facilities because people are passing out flyers negative to her. And so she locks that down, says, you can't do this anymore. You've got to go stand in this little area way outside the building that no one will ever be in if you want to pass out flyers. I mean, forget politics for a second. I mean, you're in office. You're the Kane County Board chairperson. This is just bad government. And I have a feeling, Keith, Aaron, Lee, you guys are all going to point to this as, you know, whether you're Republican or Democrat, this is the kind of BS you should not ever do. Keith, what do you think?
I mean, if it's a public space, I can't see how she can do it. She should certainly be challenged in court. The question is, does anybody have the money to do that?
Yeah.
That would be my take. I would find it highly unlikely that they would that she would have the right to do that on a public space.
How much would the media go after you, Keith, though, if like your opponents were outside the village at like a board meeting passing out flyers against you and you outlaw that and make them stand way outside in this one little cordoned off area? I mean, the media, you'd be on the 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock news.
Hey, the media goes after me saying that I'm running in violation of term limits. I've been in office for 7 years and the term limits are 12. I'm like, I mean, they'll go after me for anything.
Well,
it sounds like it's blatantly
hold on,
unconstitutional.
Michael, hold on. Let Lee go ahead.
It sounds like it's blatantly unconstitutional. And unfortunately, especially if sometimes for local officials, and I've seen it in both parties, quite frankly, is, when the pitchforks come out for you, it's a little more personal because they're a little more closer to you. In your case, you mentioned like literally right outside of where you're working. And you want to react, and they kind of ignore things like the Open Meetings Act or the Freedom of Information Act, or in this case, the constitutional right to free speech, and say, well, I have government power, so I'm going to abuse it and do this thing. And that's really what that is. It's an abuse of power.
But Democrats are the defenders of democracy until it's inconvenient for them. Yeah.
Right. That's exactly the storyline is, you could go right down the line. How many times Democrats do that? They want to talk about democracy, but you can find federal, state, local examples of them not following through on that, whether it's trying to block slating in the middle of an election cycle in Illinois, whether it's disliking their own president and, getting rid of him off the ballot, or in this case, whether deciding free speech needs to be in this corner over here where I don't have to hear it. It's all the same thing.
You know what I think they should do is I think somebody should go over there and not stand in the First Amendment zone and get their flyers and watch the enforcement of it, right? I mean, that would be one that I would be very willing to see what happens. So they're gonna give you a citation, or they're going to arrest you, or whatever the repercussion or consequence for that is, and then that would be the way to trigger the legal charge against it, right?
Yeah.
Make them enforce it.
If you're gonna do guerrilla tactics, go all the way in. I think you're right.
Oh yeah. 2 speeds, stop and full go. Just like they do down in Orland. That's how Pekau rolls.
I mean, but this is the idea here is like, this is how we're going to win. We're not going to win this is like 1776 all over again. Like, if we just want to stand in a line with muskets and shoot at each other, Republicans are going to lose. We're at a disadvantage from a numbers game, from a financial game. You're going to have to do we call it guerrilla style campaign tactics. It's what you're going to have to do if we're going to win in a state like Illinois. And so something like this, now it's a chance to call them out. I think Republicans across the state should be calling out these the Kane County Board chair for breaking the First Amendment. Make your Democrat opponent. Do you agree with the Kane County Board chairperson here who has restricted First Amendment rights? Let's make all Democrats across the states answer for this, because they claim to be the defenders of democracy.
Well, we had a similar issue at SIU Edwardsville like about a year and a half ago, and one of the student groups filed a lawsuit through Alliance Defending Freedom, I think it was, and they were successful in federal court, and they abolished the free speech zone and made the staff go through First Amendment training. So if somebody over there in Kane County is interested, I'm sure they could probably get ADL to back them, bankroll that lawsuit, and maybe get some remedy there, because that needs to happen.
Yeah. All right. I have abused the time of our guest this week too much, so we're going to close this down. We really appreciate you guys being here. As always, we end with two different segments. First, OG and Clown of the Week. Anybody you guys want to nominate, you don't have to, but anybody you'd like to nominate in Illinois politics, national politics, or just in general, you want to call out for praise or scorn from the last week, feel free to throw in your nominations. Have some fun with it.
My OG of the week is all the Democratic mailing vendors for robbing the Democratic caucus like bandits. $144,000 in 1 month of mail in August during an election cycle is crazy. Kudos to you guys. I wish I was getting that amount of business at this company. Whatever you guys are doing, give me a call. We'll figure out, we'll make a deal. I don't care. You guys are doing a great job. Oppose the people you're working for 100%, but I respect people getting a bag, and that's what the Democratic vendors are doing right now.
There you
All
go.
right, for the OG of the week, I'm going to throw out my old running mate, Gary Rabine. And the reason why I'm doing that is Gary put on a big Trump rally event over in McHenry County. And there were no actual Trumps there. There was Charlie Kirk, and there was Stephen Moore, and there was General Flynn, and there were a lot of great speakers. But he got over 6,000 people to attend, Republicans in Illinois, to come to one singular event. He footed the bill with that. I thought the production value and everything that he had out there, and all the support of law enforcement that came out to make sure that we were all protected, he did an amazing job. So he's going to be my OG for staying involved. Even though he's a resident of Florida, he's still doing stuff in his old hometown. So that's going to be my OG. The Clown of the Week is going to be, you know who you are, of members of the Illinois GOP Republican Party that are doing anything they can to disrupt good people doing good things and positive work moving forward. I'm not going to name specific names, but anybody that's watching this, you probably know who you are. You probably shoot me a nasty text anyways, but you are the Clown of the Week. And I hope that you take the face paint off and join the rest of us moving the party forward instead of being the anchor to our sails.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's 2 months from Election Day. I've had some opportunities to go on media and do what a lot of Republicans like to do, which is bash their own party. And I'm just not going to do it. Now, if we lose on November 5th, trust me, I'll be the first in line to say why we lost and call up my own party. But right now, it's 2 months out. We're all on the same team. We got to be pushing towards November 5th. And yes, there are mistakes being made. I'm absolutely logging that. And if we don't win on November 5th, we're going to talk about it. But 2 months out, this is not the time. We got to coalesce. We got to unify. And if it doesn't work, if we have some losses, then we'll talk about why those losses happen and maybe make some changes. But right now, let's not go out there and give the other side the ammunition they need to beat us. We are in the fourth quarter. This isn't the time to be sniping at our own party.
It's the 11th Amendment of Ronald Reagan. Don't speak ill of other Republicans. So my OG of the week is not political. It's Scotty Scheffler, because I love it when someone sticks it back to the media. When they asked him what happened with that shot, I shanked it. When they asked him, well, how did that happen? Well, you see, there's a spot on the club that if you hit it a little closer to that and it goes that way, not that way. So I got to give him credit for the answer. I love it when someone sticks it to the press. The Clown of the Week is Tim Waltz. I mean, it's an easy target, but when you get asked a question, which is absolutely the most legitimate question ever, what do you have to say about the 6 hostages that were executed? And you put your hand up and walk away and you want to be vice president of the United States, you are disqualified for that position, period, dot.
Well done. I agree.
For my OG of the week, I'm going to nominate Judge Joe McGraw. Speaking of it's go time, this is a gentleman who spent decades as a judge, very refined, incredibly knowledgeable. And yet he's been everywhere working it. And sometimes one of my complaints out here in our big rural areas is you get folks like that from the professional community, and they don't want to shake the hands and talk with voters and do the work and knock on doors. And Judge Joe has been everywhere putting in the work. He is not that guy. He has a fantastic resume, but doesn't think he's all that. He's out there trying to represent people, which is what this is about. So he's my OG of the week. Finish
Nice.
strong, Judge
IL-17,
Joe.
the best congressional pickup opportunity we have in the state. So glad to hear Joe's out there working hard. Michael, you got anybody? If not, it's okay. I got some to add, but just want to make sure I don't miss you.
I was going to say, clown of the week, we got to give it to that Kane County Board Chairman who apparently has never read the First Amendment, right? That's just embarrassing.
Yep, she's definitely on my list for clowns. I also have the DuPage County Clerk. We need a guest from DuPage County on so we can talk about this, but she's now being sued because she's refusing to pay invoices. There's so much more to this story. And again, I want to get somebody with insight into DuPage on one of these episodes, and we'll dig more into it. But DuPage County Clerk was a Gene Kesmerick, I believe is the name there. But in the midst of these podcasts, sometimes you lose your brain for a second. But she's one of my clowns of the week. And J.B. Pritzker. I mean, he rightfully got some grief, even from Democratic blogs, for being too busy to attend the DuQuoin State Fair. Meanwhile, he was going to other campaign stops. I said it before, he's going to Iowa next week to stump in Iowa conveniently. Iowa, first in the nation presidential primary. Gee, I wonder why he's going out there, or caucus. Pritzker for being too interested in national politics to actually go to what is the two main state fairs in this state, and he refused to show up. So he's one of my clowns of the week as well.
Even I went to DuQuoin. Even I was there. I'm not even the governor or anything. You know what I mean? I even went to DuQuoin.
There you go. My OG of the week.
Don't you go, Aaron.
So sometimes we give him grief. Sometimes we give him praise. Today, I want to give him praise. Patrick Finkson from the Illinois. He wrote a great piece on concealed carry, calling out Pritzker, who slammed the judge who ruled that the ban on concealed carry in public transit is unconstitutional on the same day that 4 people were shot in the CTA Blue Line. And Pritzker slammed the judge for that decision. And Finkson wrote a pretty good, reasonable and well-reasoned piece that frankly changed my mind on a few things, because I wasn't feeling too on board with that move. But I thought Finkson wrote a really good piece that actually, I'll give him credit, changed my mind on a couple things. So kudos to Finkson. I give him OG of the week.
Hey, maybe I can ride the metro into St. Louis for a Cardinals game for once, if that actually sticks.
Yeah, there you go. All right, let's close it down. I appreciate everybody for being here this episode. For closing thoughts, Aaron, why don't you kick us off?
Nothing, always a good time to see all my favorite friends on the smoke-filled room. Good to see you, Mayor Pekau. Lee, good to see you out there. I'm excited to have you in Springfield, my friend. I like it when people like us, that look like us, but think like us, are there. So very cool to have you. Always my buddy in St. Clair, Michael Butler, the ambassador to Southern Illinois. Chris, love you to death, my friend. Collin, always a pleasure. And I'll see you tomorrow morning, Collin, at the Palatine Township Republican event, where Collin will be our guest speaker. For those of you that can't get enough during the smoke-filled room, come to Palatine Township Republicans tomorrow at 9 a.m. for Collin Corbett.
Saturday morning. Considering Teddy just started teething and I haven't had a good night's sleep in 4 or 5 days, you might get a zombie, but I'll be there. Michael, what are your closing thoughts, bud?
I just think, kind of to bring it full circle, and how we started this off with the union conversation, I think we made a lot of good points today. I think that there's a lot of opportunities out there, especially with the individual union members, and we need to kind of lean into that, look for those opportunities, take advantage of them, because I think especially in certain regions, like my region, there's a heavy union presence. I know there's a heavy union presence in Lee's region as well, and those folks are aligned with us on a lot of the issues. They just haven't been voting that way, so let's make it happen.
Chris, go ahead.
I read an article in the Chicago Sun-Times, which I did for my sins, but it was talking about how White Sox fans need to appreciate the fact that we're the worst baseball team of all time. And, it kind of did resonate with me, because at this point, if we're going to be bad, we might as well be really bad. And I encourage the Illinois Republican Party to not take that same mentality that White Sox are doing, because we can do better. we can do outreach to or groups of people that we aren't really comfortable doing. And it's not just union workers, it's also Hispanics, it's also Asian American voters. There is a lot of groups of people in this state that we can reach out to. We don't have to hit rock bottom as the Illinois Republican Party to gain ourselves upward. But the White Sox, on the other hand, looks like we're going to hit rock bottom every week. So
there's no draft picks there's no draft picks in politics, so there's no reason to fight for draft position.
Oh, if there was draft position in politics, Collin, oh my gosh. The Illinois Republican Party, we'd have the greatest prospect pool,
right?
And the greatest bench.
We'd be like Detroit.
Time.
We'd have like the first round pick 7 years in a row.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is a struggle for me because Keith and Lee, you both brought the heat, so we're going to call it a tie. But Lee, why don't you give your closing thoughts here?
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been fun. I look forward to serving in the Senate next year. I do want to close with a shout out to our union working class families that we're doing a better and better job reaching out to. And we need to remember, as Republicans, that's what we're here for. The politics is all fun and games, but at the end of the day, we're trying to make life better for working families and for the people we represent. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think there's a lot of union households that are questioning what Democrats are doing for them. I think there's a lot of Latino households that are questioning what Democrats are doing for them. I think there's a lot of people in Chicago wondering why we're throwing money to people who aren't even citizens of America and they're not getting their stuff done. We should have an answer for all of that, taking care of them. So thanks for having me on. It's crunch time out there for election season. So let's go get them.
Keith, you get the final word. Go ahead.
Thanks everyone for coming on, and I did not know that the mayor of Dixon was going to be on the panel today. But my closing comments are about the movie Reagan, and which I happened to see this weekend. And it was my coming of age. Most of you on this call are much younger, but that was my first vote was Reagan's second election, which was obviously an electoral wipeout. But I think the movie really captured the essence of what I remember of him as president. Jimmy Carter, there was a malaise, an anti-American, America's best days are behind it. That was Jimmy Carter's stick, if you will. And Reagan brought optimism that America's the best country in the world, which it still is today. We may have forgotten that back then. We may have forgotten it now. But he had an optimism about America and about American workers and about the American people that permeated his entire presidency. And I think the movie captured that, and it certainly captured what I thought was the essence of who he was when he was president, from my recollection. So I highly recommend everyone to go see that movie.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it the last couple episodes, the need for an optimistic view as Republicans. We're so good at running things down and saying how horrible things are, but voters aren't looking for that right now. Reagan was a master at talking about the problems, but doing so in a positive way and giving a vision for how things could be better. If the Republican Party could get back to that, we'd be winning a heck of a lot more elections. So I echo your sentiments, Keith. Thank you to our guests and participants this week for being with us. This was an awesome episode. Thanks to Lane, who is scrambling to pull this together today. Appreciate all the work you do for us, Lane Davis, making these podcasts happen. To all the rest, we will be back with you next week on the Smoke-Filled Room, so be sure you like and subscribe. We'll catch you again next week, and hopefully next week I'll pick you a cigar that makes it all the way to the end of the episode. We'll see you guys again.